Yes, well, I love the title that you gave this because it almost seems like a contradiction. Two grown men talking about fear. Because I do feel, and I've felt like this for a while, that fear is probably one of the least comfortable things for grown men to talk about or acknowledge. I think things are changing a little bit, obviously, these days, but I still feel like, we can talk about our anger and we can talk about our sadness, but fear does feel like the kind of last area of sort of do not go there, or it's very uncomfortable to go there. So I'm happy to be talking about that with you, another fellow grown man.
Yeah, so it just so happens that fear is the one thing I'm sort of turning into a bit of a specialist around. It's something I'm exploring as a theme because what I've been discovering through the work I've been doing with mortality is that if we are prepared to have conversations about fear and open up and be vulnerable, all sorts of wonderful and magical things start to happen because the very act of talking about it is the first step towards reducing whatever fears may be affecting you. And, those are the fears that tend to be fueling all the limiting beliefs that hold us back in life from discovering our true selves.
Yes, and I'm curious to know, like, if there's anything in particular that you wanted to share, like a very particular insight you've discovered about fear and death. Because I know you've got your
Mm.
story, haven't you? But is there something particular that you feel like sharing?
Yeah, I do actually. I've got two quotes that I'd like to share, and I enjoy sharing them because sometimes, everything can become quite theoretical, and I
Yes.
like it when a lot of wisdom can be like boiled down into a single quote that makes more sense to people and can sit with you, and you can kind of carry it around and remember it. So my first one is a quote from Carl Jung, which is, "Where your fear is, there is your task."
Mm,
And the second one is by author Joseph Campbell, who wrote The Hero's Journey, sorry.
mm,
And his quote is, "In the cave that you fear is the treasure that you seek."
mm.
And both of these quotes have become guiding lights for how I'm trying to live my life now. So, my wife and I, for example, when we get to a moment in a conversation or trying to make a decision, we're at a bit of a crossroads or at a bit of a checkmate, stalemate. Um, if we don't know which way to go, which way to turn, we then start to ask the question, okay, which one scares us more? And we're getting into a pattern now of choosing the way that scares us the most, because what we've been discovering is that if we are prepared to make that decision and go that way, we've tended to start being rewarded by all sorts of wonderful things that we never expected. And
Amazing.
I would say that I've noticed that the things I'm scared of, when I actually step into them and approach them, tend not to be as scary as my mind has made them out to be. So there's something
For
kind of
sure.
interesting in that.
Yeah. Have you got a specific example?
Um, well, right now we're traveling the world for a year, and we made a big decision about a year ago that we were going to sell our house, we're going to sell all our possessions, we're going to take the kids out of school, we're going to leave our jobs, and we're just going to set off and not know where we're going to end up. And it was really, really scary. But we'd done it a couple of times before in smaller measures, and each time we'd been rewarded. And then when we had this feeling again that came, it's almost like a feeling that came calling, and it was our instinct or whatever you want to call it. But when it came knocking quite loudly, and we had to take it really seriously, but it felt really scary. But we looked at each other in the eye and went, let's do it, and let's have an adventure. And that's what adventures are about.
Nice. I really like that. Yeah, my sort of journey with fear and death began. It was when I was in my early 20s. I think I mentioned this when we spoke, but I was very close with my auntie. She was also a psychotherapist, And I remember when I was a teenager feeling, typically misunderstood and just frustrated with the adult world. She was one of the only people who I ever remember connecting with me on a level that felt respectful and honest and authentic. And then in my early 20s, she got quite an aggressive form of pancreatic cancer. And I remember sitting on what was essentially her deathbed with her, having these conversations about death that normally I would feel just really uncomfortable having. I think most people would, but she was just really open about it and wasn't trying to paper over the cracks or paint a rosy picture. She was really honest about her fears. And for me, those conversations were so illuminating, not just in terms of like what we were talking about, but also the fact that you could actually have an honest conversation about something that
Mm,
most people are terrified about was amazing. And
mm,
then she died, and that set me off on a journey of sort of discovery and wanting to learn more about death, reading books, going to study with different teachers, and eventually working in a hospice. So I feel like uh, I can really relate to what you're saying in terms of turning towards the fear. That was kind
mm.
of an experience that I got in those conversations with my auntie. And it's funny because I still find to this day, if I try and have conversations with certain people about death, they really put massive barriers up. Like they get really superstitious about it. If you talk about it, it means it's going to make it more likely, all of that kind of stuff. So I feel like there's still, it kind of surprises me a bit because I would have thought people who I've known for a long time would have become a bit more comfortable with talking about it, but they haven't yet. So I still think
Yeah,
there's a lot of fear more generally, especially probably in our Western culture around death.
absolutely. Yeah. And I don't know, exactly where we lost our connection to it. I think it probably was all part of us losing deeper connection with nature as a whole and like
Yeah.
slipping out of that feeling like we're part of the natural cycles of life. And of course, birth and death are part of that cycle, as we see in all the seasons. And yeah, it's really interesting hearing you talk because I can really feel the power of those experiences you had, still here today working behind the scenes in the work that you do. And what I've realized from doing work with in death as training as an end of life guide and sitting with dying people and spending a lot of time considering all of this is I spotted fairly quickly that um, all fears, all modern fears that we experience can be boiled down back to one existential fear, the grandmother fear of death. And the grandmother fear of death sits very quietly, often unnoticed, beneath it all, and rarely shows its face because we live in a society now or in a world now, unless you're very unfortunate, like those who are living in Russia and Ukraine or areas of the world like that who are in conflict and seeing death every day. But for many people, you know, you're never in a life threatening situation. And it's only when you're in a life threatening situation that the fear of death kind of reveals itself. And then you realize it was there all along. So
Mm.
when a lot of people are asked if they're scared of death, a lot of people say, no, I'm not actually. I feel fine. But I've got all
Yeah.
of these other fears,
Mm.
you know, and in the West, we spend billions of dollars putting band-aids on all of these other fears, whether
Mm.
they're mental health problems or, the list goes on and on. Most anxieties and mental health disorders have some linkage to anxiety or fear. But what most people don't know is you can boil all these back down to the existential fear of death. So, for example, like the fear of public speaking, the fear of rejection, the fear of intimacy. If you look down this sort of evolutionary lineage of these fears, they come back. They go back to when we needed them to actually survive in the wild. And so, for example, if you back in let's say 500,000 years ago, or whenever we were sort of first sort of, in our packs as human beings, um, being exiled from the tribe would mean you would be cast out, and your likelihood of survival would be very low, and you'd probably die. Now, that fear of exile manifests today in the fear of rejection in the office, for example, right? So we're still hardwired to our ancient survival instincts, and it's almost like our operating system hasn't been upgraded, and we're living today where the majority of us, I think some statistic I read recently, something like 90% of all decisions we make are based out of fear. And we're not even aware we're doing it, right? And I think we can all agree that when you make a fear-based decision, it tends to not go well. So what I'm trying to do with my work and the newsletter Dying to No Purpose is shed light on where our fears come from, because I believe until we understand properly where all our fears really come from, we're only ever going to be putting band-aids on all the smaller fears that are dictating how we live our lives today. And they're preventing us from stepping into courage and purpose and potential, and creating limiting beliefs that hold us back as individuals, but also as societies. They're dictating how we do politics, economics, how we, create educational systems. Everything, is affected by the fact that we're making fear-based decisions, and we're not actually aware of where that fear comes from, because we don't want to talk about death.
Yes. I was thinking actually it would be good. I don't know if this is appropriate because this is my first Substack Live, but to just guide a very short practice which I've discovered around the fear of death. Do you think that would be okay? Just like
Yeah, brilliant.
literally 3 or 4 minutes. So the context of this was when I was sort of doing my own personal research into death and fear of death. And I realized that essentially the nervous system, and so many people talk about the nervous system these days, probably the most overused word, but we all have a nervous system. The point of the nervous system at a basic level is to help us survive. So fear of death is just part of being alive. Like you could imagine being a creature that has zero fear of death. And you know what would happen? You wouldn't survive very long because you would lose all of the sensitivities that we've developed and evolved over time to help us survive, which starting from the tiniest amoeba that has sensitivity to its environment to like the complicated world of human beings and sharing information and language and all of that kind of stuff. So I found just a really simple practice, which is basically just acknowledging and thanking our nervous systems for keeping us alive. So if it's okay with you, we could just sort of guide ourselves and people to just sort of slow down. You can close your eyes if you like,
Mm.
and just I like to put a hand on my chest and one on my stomach, and just taking a moment just to acknowledge this nervous system and this body that is being exquisitely shaped over millions of years to be as effective as it can at keeping us alive. So any fears and anxieties that we have, anytime we feel that our nervous system is activated, feeling stressed, at the deepest root is this drive to survive. And we can, in this moment, just acknowledge and have some gratitude for this part of us, this nervous system, this body, this intelligent vehicle that we have through this life. Just appreciating all the different ways that it is trying its best to keep us alive. And sometimes, I don't know about you, but when I do a simple practice like this, I just feel a sense of calming And we can also, I'm not going to go into this in too much depth because we're only on a short Substack live here, but we can also then start to have a kind of imagine negotiation with the parts of us, the nervous system and the body that keeps us alive, to say, I don't really want fear to be the driving force of my life. So maybe you can just start to have a sense of that now. Like, what would it be like to have this conversation with your own nervous system, the parts of you, just saying, I really don't want fear to be the driving force anymore. I want to be alive and I want to survive, but I also want to live. And sometimes when we're so paralyzed by the fear of death, we actually don't feel alive, which is the biggest kind of irony. So yeah, we can just slowly come out of that short little practice. And yeah, I don't know, what did you feel there, John? I hope that was all right, by the way, because I wasn't planning to do that, but just based on what you were
No,
saying, I thought,
I think that was spot on. Thank you for sharing that. It was amazing. Yeah, I thought it was a lovely way to sort of reflect and get that perspective. Sometimes we're so caught up in our minds. I found myself almost like popping out for a second and like looking back at myself and just having that moment to appreciate, my body, my evolutionary journey to get here. And it helps to make sense of why we
mm,
feel the way we do,
mm,
and hopefully this kind of conversation can become more common and accessible. And I truly believe what we mustn't do is shy away from having it, because death is the only thing in life that's guaranteed. And it is a completely natural part of being alive. And by avoiding it is causing all sorts of problems for us. And just the very simple act of acknowledging your mortality is the first step towards stepping into deeper potential and purpose in life. The conversation around death will actually, if you have it the right way, can help you sleep better at night. It'll help you regulate your nervous system. It will improve your vitality. And then there's just this knock-on effect of like your career will improve. You'll get greater clarity. Your relationships will improve. All of that will have a knock-on effect to your well-being and your wealth. And so this big, big topic, this big thing that we're all going to experience at one point in our life, has to in some way be brought back into conversation. And everyone, we need to remember that it's just a natural thing, just like the waves in the ocean. And I think the more we speak about it, the more we normalize the conversation, the more people have time to reflect on it and become less scared of it. And everybody's health and well-being can improve.
mm. And I found that one of the most helpful things is helping people to be very, very specific about their fears about death. Because fear of death is a broad concept that covers a lot of very, very, very specific fears that people have. And I don't know if you've found this or if you've done any reflection on this, but just to give you an example of some of the fears that people typically have, maybe we can even talk about our own fears. Typically, people worry about the pain that would be associated with the dying process. People worry quite commonly about dying but still being alive. Somehow in the coffin, waking up and being trapped there. That's quite a common one. People worry about being alone. The sense of loneliness at the end of life. I think that's quite a profound one, which I can really relate to. People worry about life having had no real meaning, especially if you haven't lived your life with a sense of purpose. There's one more that I was thinking of. I can't remember it now. Does anything else come up for you?
Well, yeah, I mean, I read something the other day, a statistic that shocked me, which was um, around 2/3 of people in the West die with a major life regret. And when I read that, my eyes kind of almost popped out on stalks, and I was Wow, that is shocking. Makes total sense though. Um, and no one deserves to live to die with a major life regret. But my personal opinion is the sooner you start having this conversation, the sooner you can actually mitigate against dying with a major life regret. It's when you're putting off the conversation by postponing the conversation around death, you're postponing living life fully. And
Yeah,
so they're completely, they're two sides of the same coin, right? So yeah, just start talking about it and you start living fully. And all of these fears that you have about all these what ifs, or what if I wake up in the coffin? What if, all of these dreadful possibilities in the future start to reduce down because you start to gain more clarity, more control over this concept that feels very vague and scary because no one's talking about it.
that's
Um,
interesting.
and
So
what
you think, go on, sorry.
um, one thing, a little tool I'd like to just share with people on the call is that there is a Buddhist meditation whereby a lot of Buddhist monks will wake up in the morning. The first thing you do is meditate on their own death for 10 minutes and they imagine themselves dying. And they're therefore, at the end of that meditation, able to then step into each day in full gratitude for being alive. And then they will live that day to its biggest potential, right? And I think the problem that we've created for ourselves by not talking about death is we take life for granted. We're just walking around thinking like we're going to live forever. And then the end starts to become very scary. So I've been using that meditation, but sort of taking it one further. And I would offer up this idea that if you can, as often as you can, once a day, once a week, whatever it is, start to imagine not what you dying, but imagine the feeling at the end of life of having lived a full, complete life with everything you said you needed to say has been said, and everything you needed to do has been done. And start to visualize that ending. Don't imagine yourself freaking out in a coffin, waking up after you died. Start to imagine that you have lived the richest life you possibly can. As you do that as frequently as you can, and it has two effects. Number one, the more you put yourself at the end of your life and visualize that lovely end of feeling a kind of blissful sense of completion, your fear of the end starts to melt away. And it's a bit like a kind of visualization technique. So anybody who enjoys manifesting or writing goals or whatever it is, this is the ultimate version of that. Go right to the end, start visualizing how you want to see, how you want to feel at the end of your life. And then what will happen if you do believe in manifestation and visualization is if you repeat that and you embody that feeling as you go into your day, then the universe will take it as an instruction and then organize your life from today so that you will have that outcome at the end of your life, right? And intuitively, that means everything you've ever wished for will have been taken care of to get yourself to that point at the very end of your life.
Hmm, that's nice. I like that one. I actually had a kind of reverse version of that I discovered recently and I wrote about in my Substack, which was the pre-mortem. I don't know if you've heard of that. Can you still hear me, by the way? Because I'm getting a bit of
Yeah.
feedback.
Yeah. Yes,
Yeah.
I can. Yeah.
The pre-mortem was an idea a management consultant came up for helping teams who are working on really super high profile important projects to try to not mess it up, to try to succeed, basically. And rather than visualizing the perfect end goal, he got them to, as a team, really take time to visualize the project really going wrong. And he found that if people visualized how it would go wrong, they were then more prepared to make the right choices to avoid those likely things. And I actually found this kind of principle, it's kind of like an adjunct to what you're doing, but can be really helpful to apply to an end of life type of meditation where you can imagine, for example, being at the end of life and having some regrets, for example, because in my mind, the reality is you're probably going to have some regrets anyway. It's about the regrets that you choose to do something about. Because we have all of these, as a human being, we have all of these dreams and desires, longings, and I don't know about you, but for me, I'm just having to confront on a daily basis the impossibility of actually being able to do all the things that I want to do. So there's a kind of grief that's needed to sort of let go of the some of the things that you won't be able to do. And so kind of you can use that pre-mortem to think about the end of life, like what would it be like if you didn't address the most important regret that you would feel the worst about if you got to the end of your life and hadn't done anything about that. So it's just a kind of a slight
Mm,
twist and an extra dashing onto your meditation. There's one more thing I just wanted to say is I really feel alongside the idea of purpose is the idea of presence. And one of the things that I found having a death awareness practice can help me hugely with is really becoming more present and really appreciating the preciousness of this present moment. Like we are, for example, we're here right now having this conversation about a really important topic. You're on a different part of the world, but it's a precious moment. Who knows whether something like this will ever happen again? And somehow I feel like that's an important thing to mention alongside purpose, because one of the risks that I found personally, and I see a lot of people doing this, is the fear of death causes them to get this kind of anxious sense of purpose. Like, I've got this limited amount of time and I've got to try and fill it with as many things as possible. And I've got to leave a massive legacy and da 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 da. But that energy can actually take you out of just a deep appreciation of the preciousness of this moment. So I just wanted to
mm.
mention that to sort of present sits alongside purpose.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Thanks for sharing that. I think it's been funny. Well, funny is not the right word. It's been a interesting journey trying to define what purpose really is. And yeah, you mentioned you could fall into the trap of putting too much urgency and pressure on needing to find purpose. And if you are suffering from anxiety in any way, it can end up in a negative spiral. And any form of anxiety, and I've experienced a lot of anxiety in my own life, and my own personal experience of it is that anxiety constantly took me out of being present because I was normally worried about something that may go wrong, you know. So worrying about something in the future inherently takes you out of being present, and when you're not able to be present, you're not able to be, a loving friend or family member, or it takes clarity out. So yes, the pursuit of, or the kind of the journey to finding presence is completely linked to our fears. And you know this kind of conversation, if people could have more of these kind of conversations,
Mm,
the fears will start to subside, and
mm,
then you can step into deeper presence, and from that position you're more aware of the purpose you already possess. It's not like it's out there somewhere, your purpose, like you got to go
mm,
find it, and there's all this pressure.
mm.
Purpose is usually hiding in plain sight. It's usually already
Exactly.
in you.
Mm,
It's about stepping into it or remembering it again,
mm,
you know?
mm. Yes. I'm wondering if it might be helpful. Please do direct this because I feel like this is you're hosting this Substack live, but it might be helpful to sort of maybe talk about children and death, and how we might help children to have sort of a better relationship with death, and
Mm.
or B, maybe giving people like some practical pointers about if they were to leave this conversation, what could they do next to really embed this kind of practice? Do you have a sense
Yeah.
of
So
any of those being helpful?
yeah, for me, I think the best thing you can do as a parent is have the conversation with your kids. Don't hide the conversation around mortality under a carpet. Be open with it, normalize it in front of your children. And an amazing gift, because the earlier your children can feel normalized around this very thorny subject, the less likely they're going to develop a lot of the fears that many people carry around as adults who do not have this conversation. So I think that is a real gift. So it boils back down to just starting to have this chat and normalizing this conversation. And, it will have ripple effects out into your children, your friends, your family, everyone around you.
I can see objections popping out in people's minds. Maybe it's the people that I know who would say, yes, but if you talk to children about death, it's going to make them more worried. We don't want them to be more worried. Like, for example, a classic kind of conversation that I think a lot of parents deal with at some point is, are you going to die at some point? And when are you going to die? Sometimes children can be very blunt and very direct. And it's quite hard for parents, I think, to navigate that conversation sometimes because they
Mm,
are worried that they don't want their child to be more worried. They don't want them to be up at night worrying that their parents are not going to be around the next day. And maybe those worries get triggered by something they've read or something they've watched, or somebody dies in the family. Lots of different things can happen. But do you have a sense of that? Yeah, how a parent might overcome, if they could overcome or wanted to overcome that objection in their mind that
mm.
if I have this conversation, it's going to make them more worried about me or more worried about death.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a tricky kind of pickle of a situation, but I keep going back to where we started with these quotes. Carl Jung saying, "Where your fear is, there is your task," and Joseph Campbell saying, "In the cave that you fear is the treasure you seek." So we have to we're getting to a point in human evolution where we there's an urgency and a responsibility to step into our fears. And as parents, I think we have to take responsibility to step into these fears. You step into them, you realize they're not as scary as you think they are. And as adults, we have to, get more in touch with our fears and get more in control of them if we can. That will then we can then and only then have that proper conversation with our children. Because if we're chatting to our children from a place of fear, of course it's going to perpetuate. And the fear that a child, there's a brilliant expression which is children swim in the emotions of adults. I can't remember who said that. But if the adults are scared because we're not having the chat about this subject, then of course the children are going to replicate that fear. And then you're in a kind of catch 22 where no one wants to talk about it. And we're better off not talking about it just in case the kids get scared. So the antidote of it is to step into it and have these chats. I don't
Yeah.
really see any other way around it.
And there's one key thing I think that is important to add to that is about uncertainty, because that's reminded me of the other fear of death that people commonly have is people are terrified that they don't know what's going to happen when they die. They don't know what's going to happen after they die. And it's can be so simple and empowering to just embrace and be okay with uncertainty. I'm not saying it's that easy to do necessarily, because some people have developed such a sense of needing to control things, to control the environment, to feel safe, and that's totally understandable. But it's definitely possible with practice to feel more comfortable with uncertainty. And that applies to conversations with children as well. Like I've found it can just be really helpful and honest to say, if a child says, if your child says, "Are you going to die one day?" You can say, "One day I will die." And when are you going to die? I said, "I don't know that, but I hope it's not going to be for a very, very long time." But it's the don't know bit and being okay with the don't know bit that I think a lot of people miss that or don't feel comfortable. They feel like as a parent, you should have all the answers neatly packaged for your child to eat so they can feel comfortable about life. But actually, there's a deeper comfort that can be found through embracing uncertainty.
Absolutely. yeah, very well said. And there's another quote out there, something like, the more comfortable you become with uncertainty, the more secure you become. Or sorry, that's right. The more comfortable you become with insecurity, the more secure you become. And the more you crave security, the more insecure you become. Um, and, I have a vision. I've just started my Substack 5 months ago, and it's been the launch of my new career. I have a vision in 10, 15 years' time to set up a foundation that persuades governments in the West to introduce mortality awareness into school curriculum so that children are taught and educated about the only thing in life that's guaranteed from an early age. So it's not just all on the parents' shoulders responsibility. It's taught in a nice, safe, responsible way. Not just to help them understand from an early age that we are mortal beings, but all of the magnificent benefits of stepping into that, knowing that you are mortal, because the moment you step into that is the moment your limiting beliefs come down, courage flies in, and you take more risks with your life. You live a more full life, full of potential and purpose. And so the benefits of having this conversation are huge. And I would like to say that on my Substack, I've got a whole library of guided exercises if people are interested, all designed in different ways to help you reflect on this kind of subject in a sort of safe and positive way that gives you techniques and ideas of how you can come to terms with this yourself, but also, use it as a catalyst for deeper potential.
Nice. Can we, by the way, sorry to be practical in the middle of this conversation, but can we put links when this gets shared afterwards, or does it not work
I
like
think
that?
what's going to happen is when we finish in a sec, you could choose to email it out immediately to everybody.
Okay,
So, and it will have us both tagged in it. So hopefully anybody should be able to click through to your site, and
great.
maybe you want to say a few words about your work, and click through to my work as well.
Well, I can mention my Substack, which is called The Heart of Being Human, where I have been writing about the intersection of our minds or psychology, spirituality, and what's happening in the culture. So it's kind of reflections on themes like shame, fear, death awareness, self-consciousness, and also linking what's happening in our inner worlds to what's happening in the outer world. So looking at big cultural moments and what they reflect back to us about ourselves. But I really wanted to mention my charity actually, because a part of me is something I set up about 11 years ago now to help people have conversations about death, but it was mostly helping young people through grief. And we're just launching this Mother's Day this range of cards, which I think I have them somewhere here. Basically, we designed these cards with bereaved young people to send to people on days like Mother's Day, Father's Day, anniversaries, Christmas, who might be feeling despairing or alone because they don't have a mum or a dad. And people feel so terrified, they don't know what to say. So the campaign is called There Are No Perfect Words. Because we have this saying in British culture, there are no words, which is what people sometimes say to somebody when they don't know what to say. If somebody's lost someone, say, there are no words, which is better than nothing, but it's a bit naff as well, isn't it? So we've got this thing, there are no perfect words, but helping people to think about just using words as tools for connection. Don't think that your words have to be perfect if you're speaking to somebody about death or about grief. So I just really wanted to mention that, and hopefully we can find a way to put a
Mm.
link.
Brilliant. Well, Louis, I've got a lot of admiration for what you do, and
You too.
may it continue. Yeah. Thank you so much for taking the time to do this call, and
My pleasure.
I hope everyone's enjoyed watching it.
Yes, thank you so much, John. Speak soon.
Cheers, mate. Bye.